Oh, I didn't know it was going to do
Didn't know either.
that. Welcome to the Life Alive podcast, where we explore what it means to live vibrant, juicy lives in the real world. Today, I am joined by the beautiful human extraordinaire, Diana Ladio. Diana is a five-string violinist, writer, educator, and thinker based in Nashville, Tennessee. She co-fronts the electric strings ensemble, the Moxie Strings, with whom she's toured for 14 years and taught enrichment workshops in hundreds of schools nationwide. She fiddles with, or she did fiddle with the notorious Celtic rock outfit, the Elders, until their retirement. And a few years ago, she started her nonprofit, the Moxie Project. Was that your first nonprofit?
Yeah.
And which this nonprofit provides musical experiences to underserved schools throughout the US. And then most recently, she continued her philanthropic activities back in March with Music by My Side, which offers musical experiences to hospitals, to those who are hospitalized and living in senior communities who are isolated due to the pandemic. She is an avid emotional health advocate and mentor and writer of the beautiful and evocative blog Drift.
Oh, thank you, Anne Marie.
Clearly, Diana is passionate about bettering the world through togetherness and music. So, thank you so much for joining me today, Diana. It is such a pleasure to be connecting with you today.
It is my pleasure entirely. I'm honored that you would ask. Thank you so much.
So, I want to kick off the conversation talking about one of my favorite topics, which is around how we can set up our lives to be more successful through personal rituals. So,
Yeah.
will you kick off our conversation today telling me how you started your day today and
Yeah.
what you had for breakfast?
Oh, I love that. Okay. Well, and this is a source of a lot of growth for me, actually, because starting my day with a routine is pretty normal for me. But actually eating breakfast and making food a part of that routine is relatively new. And so that's good. That's me kind of just working on taking care of my body and making sure that I'm prioritizing all avenues of health. In addition to, normally it would involve movement and exercise and some the emotional and mental aspect of what for me needs to be done in the morning, but actually fueling my body is often an afterthought. So
Really?
this was good. Yeah. Yeah. And so today I found that my brain tends to work very quickly in the mornings and it tends to kind of go through its rapid thoughts. And so rather than fighting them, I often give it kind of some tasks and give it some projects to work on. So I will usually set my alarm for a few minutes earlier than I need to actually be up, with the idea that I can kind of plan my day and chart out what needs to be done and give that if my brain is going to already be kind of quick paced in the morning, it allows me to give it a job to work on,
Hmm.
actually make it useful and productive instead of just spinning on topics that it can do nothing about.
I really
um,
love
I,
that.
yeah, it's been nice. And I had a tendency to, and I still do, pop awake, no trouble falling asleep because I'm exhausted at the end of the day, but popping awake early and not being able to fall asleep. It's kind of one of those more common forms of insomnia. But um, rather than fighting that again and trying to harness it when my kind of brain is all over the place, I found that that is my most creative time now. If I can just kind of like take my hands off the wheel and give it an avenue, whether it's writing and jotting notes in my phone for my next blog post, or I try to keep like some type of small instrument around, or I'll be singing voice memos into my phone. And that was a really big breakthrough for me like 2 or 3 years ago, was using what was felt like it was really holding me back and hindering me and was really challenging, and restructuring and just looking at it differently and finding ways to put that time to good use. And I don't know, full blog posts will just kind of spill out of my brain in those early hours, and or I'll wake up humming a particular tune and it's my time to pull out my laptop and just kind of put the bare bones of the arrangement together. And so when the pace of the day quickens and you don't have that mental space to be able to go off on all those tangents and really
Mhm.
explore, all of that's been done already, you know? So when it's time to sit down and release the blog post, kind of the creative energy was encapsulated at a different time, and now it's time to just implement. So my mom has always said too that she does her best thinking at night because it's almost like the world bandwidth is a little lower. You know, there's nobody around to distract you. Not everybody else is thinking. They're all quietly sleeping, and it just, for whatever
Mhm.
reason, that becomes the space for my creativity to actually flourish.
I've
So,
heard different traditions call that the hour of God. And
okay.
very typically, like at some point when our natural circadian rhythms allow us to wake up in the middle of our sleeping episode, it's like that's where you have this space to be creative. And so when you're talking, I'm hearing like this amazing ability to, or wisdom really, to like let go of the judgments of, I should be doing this right now, I should be sleeping, I should be shutting down my brain, and just
Absolutely.
going with the flow of like creative life.
Mm-hmm.
And like what beautiful things have you noticed coming out of this letting go and allowing for yourself?
Oh, those words, Anne Marie, letting go and allowing, have been the biggest challenge and the deep work of my last like 3 years of my life. I am an achiever and a go-getter and love my plans and goal setting and just make it happen. And to acknowledge that some of the most beautiful things in life happen organically when you have nothing to do with them it really has been a practice, you know, in
Mhm.
the moment and in, you know, traveling and being able to just let days unfold as they will, but also just in life in general, because you set goals and you expect certain things to happen in different milestones in your life, and when they don't happen that way, it can feel a little discouraging and you feel stalled. But if I really look back on the most powerful things that happened in my life, starting my bands, joining my other band, starting my blog, moving to Nashville, they all happened without me making a very concrete decision or setting a goal. You know, I just made a series of daily decisions that I knew were continuing to be honest and true to where I kind of wanted to end up. And those opportunities kind of grow from underneath you, and they arise way more organically than setting your mind to something and making it happen. Which, I was a runner for many years. That was my just, and being in school, you know, you have deadlines, you do well, you get the A, and then you know you're done. And outside of that institutionalized idea of achievement, here we are just kind of floating, knowing that we want to achieve things and setting some goals, but there's not necessarily a definitive endpoint to a lot of it.
Mhm.
And yeah, really thinking about some of the best things that happened to me really being a combination of much smaller, honest decisions than any one big decision, you know?
Mhm.
Um, and that is really helping me trust this idea of taking my hands off the wheel a little bit and just acknowledging that it's not all up to me. And in fact, things, really wonderful things happen when I don't get myself too involved and I don't overthink and I don't overplan and I allow that space for things to happen naturally. So the 4 a.m. wake ups are kind of a perfect isolated snapshot of that, and just saying, you know, I trust my ability to operate on a little bit less sleep because my brain, there's something it wants to say and there's something that wants to come forth right now. And like you said, instead of fighting it, I'm going to honor it and give it the space it needs. So
And I just have to wonder, like, how do you marry that or meld that perhaps with our Western culture of overproductivity and being goal oriented and constantly having to strive for the next paycheck, whatever's coming up next. How do you find some balance with being in flow and taking just the next right step, not knowing what the outcome is going to be when we live in that society and really need to be able to function within that?
absolutely, that is such an abstract and difficult concept, and it's still a work in progress for me, because the operative word being balance. Yeah, and I think for me, because my tendency is to be overly regimented and trying to very specifically guide things down a particular path, it's easier for me to kind of start there and then be open to the pivots. And day to day, I'm in Nashville in particular, you have musical opportunities fall into your lap constantly, which is why I live there, just to be
Hmm.
around other musicians, and not always to play, but to go out to a show or to sit side stage with a friend who's playing with so and so. And there's just always going to be cool opportunities. So I, even on a day to day basis, am confronted with this having to pivot constantly, and it's like so challenging for me. And I've had to learn that when somebody texts me at 3 p.m. and my plan was to practice and then do some video editing and then make a really healthy dinner and then get in bed early, that's what I was going to do that evening. And
Hmm.
then I get a call an hour ahead of time that says, hey, so and so is playing and we've got backstage passes and would you like to meet them? And I go, no, absolutely not. Like, my initial tendency is to say, absolutely not. This was my plan. This is what, and I have written about this before because I had to switch the mindset actively every time this happens and go, instead of defaulting to no, let's default to yes, and then see if there's a way that we can logistically convince ourselves that really it's not a good opportunity and we should stay the course. That's, we need to be practicing for something in particular, or is this really an opportunity that we should default to yes and then find ways to accommodate in our schedule, get up a little earlier tomorrow and practice. And
Hmm.
that was a big one. And actually, Allie, my bandmate, and I, she and I have similar trouble with this. So to be on the road and have something cool come up, it's very hard for us, and it takes a solid like 20 or 30 minutes to work it in and go, okay, is there a way that this could be a more important use of time? And okay, that means that we won't necessarily get the gym workout in like we were looking forward to, but and so it's just kind of this, it's a constant narrative. But it's hard when the instant absolutely not happens to keep your mind open, just that slight crack that says, maybe if I let this other opportunity just kind of simmer for a second, I'll be able to do the pivot. It just does not happen quickly for me at
Hmm.
all
Hmm.
still.
Well, we're
um,
all like hardwired to have that certain response. And what I love about what you're saying is that you're allowing this space to marinate with the idea and tune in to yourself, and then use your mind to think about, okay, well, these other things in life still need to happen. You still need to feed
mhm.
yourself a healthy meal. You still need to take care of your body through exercise and sleep. So,
Right.
how can you refit your life to fit what is most important to you? And perhaps sometimes that means you still come back to the opportunity, the new opportunity, and say, you know what, probably not this time.
Right.
And sometimes it's like full on, hell yeah, bring it on. I'm all ready for this. And navigating that moment to moment is like, oh, I just love talking about this. It's so
Yes,
key.
because absolutely, I'm with you. It's just such an active practice. It's not. Some people are. It's so easy to be spontaneous. They just default to yes and bring it on, and then they kind of pick up the pieces later. And I think something in the middle is important, but I do envy that ability to just change gears without even thinking about it.
Mhm.
But to answer, I guess bringing that around to answer your question about finding that larger life balance. I think if I set a particular goal and kind of throw it off into the distance without necessarily like a rigid time, like a deadline or a time frame, but I just know that that's the direction that I would like to go. And this has been important research for me during COVID too. I day to day, and say I had a plan and another cool opportunity came up, like we were just saying, that scenario, I think about that goal in the future as being what dictates that decision. So if my goal in the future is to figure out what my next big musical step is going to be, I know kind of what I would like to do, but I also am enjoying that it's pretty open ended. Like, I know that I'm working on my own music, and right now it's maybe experimenting with a solo album, but I don't know if my next big musical step is going to be touring with somebody or as a solo artist or, recording with somebody. And so when I think to myself in that moment, practicing and getting a good night's sleep, most days that's absolutely the most important. But when this big opportunity comes to potentially meet people or be out in the Nashville scene, I think about that goal. This can happen another time. This is happening now. And that would be what oriented me towards
Mhm.
making that
Mhm.
decision. Just the umbrella that hovers over day to day.
You just gave me such, for myself, an important aspect, and I want to bring it back because I felt like what you said was when you set that goal in the future, it's it has a clear intention, but it's open ended. So
Right.
you're not like bottlenecking yourself into something. It's not rigid, and life is going to bring to you those opportunities that will guide you to whatever that end outcome is. And it's such a beautiful unfoldment. So, like the open ended questions, the open ended results. That's
I
beautiful.
love that. But you're asking specific questions. You know, the questions say what in my music career is going to be next, not what's going to be next. And
Right.
that alone, was a big distinction because I do love writing and I love visual art and I love conversation like this. Like we could talk for days, Anne
I
Marie. I know
know.
you're
Let's just get
similar.
out the coffee and it'll be good.
Oh, I
Snuggle.
know. I just love it. I just live for it. And that brings in my teaching and how much I enjoy that. And I do feel the last year or so I felt a little aimless, and there's no concrete direction. Although just in the last like 6 months or so, I've had some opportunities to do some writing. I've had some opportunities to familiarize myself and be in a circle with other like mental health writers and coaches. And to be honest, all of those felt, and this was just personal research, all of those taught me and felt to me like they were a little bit of a distraction from what I wanted to be doing. And I didn't
Mm.
understand what I wanted to be doing until I felt a little tugged off that path. And so now I have this confirmation that that music is what I want to be my focus right now. And that there's still so much to be learned in that realm that will supplement the writing and, the coaching or the mentorship, that is what I'm most excited about. And I feel very lucky to have been given the opportunity to meet different people and, just surround myself with different scenarios so that I've been able to hone in on what like really feels right. But that was after 2020, a year of just you said something that I think about a lot, which is that the most honest and next right decision. I would wake up and go into my creative space, and whatever felt the need to come out that day was what I just allowed to. And it
Mm.
might have been practicing piano, it might have been working on voice exercises, it might have been sitting and writing a blog post. And in my mind, I had to be more patient with the fact that none of those really feel cohesive to me. Like, I don't know why I'm practicing piano. I'm not working towards anything, but it felt really right and good in that moment to spend that hour doing that. And I have to trust that eventually all of these avenues, those skills will somehow, even if it was just in improvisation or just the act of creating that creative time, all of these will eventually be means to an end and will make sense sometime. But yeah, just honestly doing whatever feels good in the moment is
Mm.
very difficult for me as someone goal oriented, but I think that that's key because you never know what's going to blossom from that, because if your intuition and your psyche and your heart are telling you that something feels really good right there or right at that moment, it's worth trusting. I've found. So.
I'm really curious. I think one of the things that drew me to reaching out to you at this time was your latest blog post. You wrote about the reflective practice that you've been in, looking back on your life before COVID and setting intention for what you want your life to be. Now that we're starting to like kind of come out of this, it feels like things are opening up and we're kind of climbing out of this hole.
Mhm.
So I'm really curious for you to dive into that for yourself a little bit. Like, what has that been for you? What intentions are you setting, and how are you working with that?
Absolutely. And it's so current. I mean, it's happening right now as we speak. And I don't know about you, but I'm already feeling like because things are opening up a little bit, I'm able to look kind of in retrospect at the year already and go, what a crazy, like, hard reset for humanity. Like, it felt so long in the moment, but in our lifetimes, it's going to be this random little blip where everything went offline and then we had to reboot and start again. And there's really no other generation that I can think of, certainly not living, that's had this strange, I would call it an opportunity. And that's kind of what I'm really convinced of, is that we've had this opportunity to have so many things lifted out. And granted, a lot of really good things were lifted out and things that we we lost people and we missed our jobs and certain members of our family. And I mean, it was just so much of it. And for me as a musician, not being on stage and not connecting with people and being able to share my art, that was a whole series of blog posts ahead of this one, where how just kind of
Mhm.
devastating that was. There were so
Mhm.
many of us that had no idea how to exist without that performance piece and without sharing our art, and your whole identity comes into question. You're not really
Everything.
sure. Yeah, if you're not on stage performing for people, are you even a musician? Is that what
Who
do you
are you
call yourself, a
even?
performer? Literally, yeah. So after kind of relinquishing control and just acknowledging that alongside not having my art and performance and connection comes a lack of motivation, and things kind of slow to a stop. And instead of fighting that, I just kind of let it happen. And I will also say, aside from all of how difficult it was to have those things lifted out at the start of COVID, it was a break that I had needed for like the last 10 years of my life.
Right.
And I think that there were quite a few of us that went, I'm as tragic as it is, I'm not heartbroken that this is happening right now, because I mean, at 10 years on the road, and I just didn't realize how exhausted I was. I didn't touch my instrument for almost a month. I just slept and didn't go to the gym and didn't have to think about putting stage clothes on, and all of the little things that would maybe be voices that would dictate my day to day and just be pretty exhausting. I was able to just lift a lot of those off. And I guess that really, to answer your question now, circling back around, I've gotten a year without several things that were causing me a lot of stress that I don't think that I really fully realized the effect they were having on my day-to-day life until they were gone and things got significantly better. And to be really candid, one of them was the level of kind of overworked, wheels spinning constantly on mindless tasks that was required of me for my band in particular. Contracts, details, social media, call times, invoicing. We have a lot of help with that, but not quite enough. And it meant that I was kind of overseeing everything. And even though we had a team of people, it was still me in charge in many ways. And that, I just don't think I really realized the toll that took, even on my sleep and everything, when everybody kind of defaults to me for the decision making. So relief from that was huge. And then I'm realizing now, a lot of my time and energy would go into how I felt about myself personally, and my confidence as a musician, but also my body and how I looked on stage, and kind of
Wow.
staying looking a particular way, making sure all stage clothes fit, making sure your whole life is in the spotlight. And I was kind of like living in fear of the pictures after shows. It was,
Wow.
how do I pick the outfit on stage that I know when I get into my hotel room and pictures are already posted, within a few minutes of the performance, that I'm not, feeling kind of like crap about it afterwards. And that trickles back into every decision you make, food wise, and whether to go to the gym or not. And yeah, unfortunately, I don't think I fully realized how like aesthetic and visual, like looks and body oriented my thought processes were, until I didn't have to think about that. And it didn't really set in until all of our summer shows were canceled, and I was able to go, for the first time, I don't have to think about being in like tank tops and crop tops on stage. I can actually just breathe and eat a little more freely and not have this kind of dictating my day-to-day decisions. And so between having some of those sources of, well, both those are probably the major sources of stress that I hadn't quite diagnosed until they were gone. And now, as we're touring again and going back into it, I'm feeling them creep back in, like without a doubt, both. And Moxie is working towards getting a manager, which would be the role that I was functioning in.
Mhm.
And I kind
Mhm.
of sat down and said, this is a change that has to happen if we're going to continue, because my mental state has been more positive and been more just effortless and forward moving than it's ever been. And I can't slip backwards from this. I have to preserve this. Um, and yeah, and then the other is thinking about, even though I don't think I'll ever fully break the habit of thinking about how I look on stage, there's things that I can do I can definitely relinquish a lot more control that way. But even in just kind of choosing to, Allie and I have kind of gone to more of a uniform model. So we basically wear the same thing almost at every show so that people are really focusing. We're giving them the opportunity to focus more on the music than the bright red
And the
dress that
clothes.
we're wearing. Yeah. So, and that's something that I think we're still actively working towards. But yeah, in
The body
general,
image is so insidious in our culture, like no matter what your size. And how do you, like, I've heard every which way around that. So, how do you even begin to work with loving the body that you're in and letting go versus being restrictive and kind of forcing it into a shape?
yeah, I mean, you summed up some serious work for me in the last, I'd say 3 or 4 years, but specifically, I mean, I can do the work and I can have the conversations and do the therapy to try to kind of break some of those habits, but until I took away one of the major sources of it, which was being on stage, I think that there was still a resistance that I couldn't really let those ideas really sink in because I felt in so many ways like my career was based on a particular image and branding. I mean, there's even a word for it. It's marketing. It's not, you don't, that's one thing that I've noticed in Nashville, which is very industry oriented, is they don't necessarily call it your looks or your body. They'll talk about it as branding or marketing or image. And you know that
Mhm.
that's what they're getting at. Not me in particular, but when I hear them referencing other artists and it really does. It ties in your art and your whole product with how you take care of yourself and how your body looks. And that's so much more true on a mainstream level than it is for Allie and I. And so many people would insist that that's, totally in your head. We love your music no matter what you look like. But
It's
especially
not.
with, it's not. And there, people have comments after shows and, even if they mean for them to be compliments, by commenting on one of the two of our looks, you're acknowledging that you've noticed and that it's something that you felt was noteworthy that wasn't our music. And
Mhm.
that alone, even if it's a compliment, kind of instantly makes you self-conscious, and it reminds you that you are up there as a visual performer as much as you are a musician, which is a big part of it. But yeah, there were many years that I associated, wow, we're getting really honest, I love this, Anne Marie, where that I associated and I would have sworn that this was not true, but my worth as a musician, my looks were so just intertwined with that. They were one and the same. And I thought to myself, well, I can play fiddle well enough, but if I look good playing fiddle, that's leverage. Like maybe that's my
Right.
selling point that a lot of other players don't have. And so eventually it got to an unhealthy level, and I had to start really shifting my mindset and going, how can I feel confident and full and proud of myself as a musician first, and then knowing that any type of visual aesthetic is really just extra. It's not something that should be at all related to how I'm playing. And you can only go so far because the industry, I mean, there's no way around the fact that if you look a particular way, you're more likely to get a gig if it's the performance industry. But um
Especially when you're a woman.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, and that there's no way around it. But I mean, for my own mental peace, I had to begin to, it was less, honestly, it was less about taking my mind off of my looks and more on building my confidence as a musician, because I think I was almost compensating in the visual department because I wasn't fully confident in the way that I was playing. And so
Mm,
yeah, that
it's
taking
huge.
the time to really tackle my instrument and figure out, there was a lot in my life that was trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. I was trying to sound like a traditional Irish fiddle player, and that's not what my background is. Or I was trying to hang in sessions where they've grown up learning tunes and they have thousands and thousands of tunes, and that wasn't my background. So I couldn't really compare myself there. Bluegrass, I'm new to. I don't know a whole lot of those tunes. So kind of acknowledging that where my role in the fiddle and strings world with as a classical player who dabbles in lots of things, and discovering my voice actually is more electronic and mainstream sounding, and acknowledging that I had something to offer without comparing to these different subgroups was a key part of it. So.
I think the work that you and Allie have done with the Moxies has been incredible just for the entire string community, the entire education community. And it touches into this, like your niche and what you're offering to the world. Because, you know, when the two of you started touring and doing workshops with school groups, it was like, okay, finally we have, like, educators have someone to share with our students that actually knows how to connect with those students and take them from point A to point B. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Like there are, you know, bajillions of musicians out there that are incredible at their craft, as you are, in different ways, that when you put them in front of students, they have no idea how to connect the dots for them.
Right.
So I mean, this is like part of, I think, the conversation, but just part of like your gift to the world. And I want to kind of steer the conversation towards those philanthropic sort of passion projects that you have, and tell us more about what you're doing with the Mox project and with what's the other one? I can't remember the name of it.
Oh,
now.
Music by My Side.
By My Side. So tell us more about those two projects. How did you birth them? Like, how is this working for you? And yeah, what do you see it turning into in the future?
First of all, thank you. That's like no bigger compliment to me personally, especially coming from a teacher that the experience for your kids was a positive one. And I mean, that's just, Allie and I figured out pretty early on. It was, kind of two major moves. We figured out pretty early on that we enjoyed teaching, and as classical kids who went on this journey to figuring out all kinds of other stuff and sounds and hanging in different scenarios and musical environments, there was so much to be learned that we didn't necessarily learn in school, and we could help a lot of students find their personal paths in music. And again, coming back to our conversation earlier, we didn't make that decision. We didn't sit down and go, okay, let's talk about some clinics. And it happened so organically. We had a couple people invite us in just to perform. And then I had done some work studying improvisation in my undergrad and came up with an activity to be able to introduce it. And they, over the course of a year or two, just kind of became this product that then became a small business. And it's actually helpful for me to remember that too, that was not a flip of a switch. We made the decision to teach. It was very organic, and now we brag about it with all our kids. We tell them, our lives are awesome. Like, we just had to stay open-minded and find our own path. But yeah, and then the service element of things was something that became really important to me in the last, probably 4 or 5 years. It was a big step for me to acknowledge that I love music, and I love serving people and connecting with people above all else. And that under that umbrella is the blog, and is the teaching, and then the nonprofit. And it makes total sense in my head that all of the things that I do are an attempt to be in service of other people. And it's just, it is a no-brainer to me, and to just perform wouldn't be enough for me. And the teaching, I put in the service element as well, helping students find their way. But yeah, the nonprofit was kind of a passion project because I just got kind of burnt out working with the same demographic of students all the time, which was your mostly white city suburbs. They're very receptive. They can play well, but they don't need the ideas. They'll go on to really fun lives in music. And don't get me wrong, there are plenty of students in those groups that needed and really benefited from what we did. But I just knew that there was so many students who would never have the opportunity to have guest artists, where drawing a relationship between the instrument they're learning or themselves as individuals and the music that they love listening to and everything that exists in their lives, that really could be life-changing for the right kid. And so I just went, Al, we've never done a Kickstarter. We've never done crowdfunding. We've been so lucky as a band to not have to do that. And so I know that we've got some cred with our people. Do you think that we could start something charitable with the idea that it wouldn't just be donating money to us. It would be to keep this, like, our clinics alive and sending them into different places, eventually growing to send other clinicians in. And yeah, it
Mhm.
happened it was pretty foolproof because we have such an amazing fan base, and not amazing in size, but just they're such amazing people that,
Supportive.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, 2018, I did. 501c3s are no joke. We were thinking maybe we'll just do an LLC. No. So we hold board meetings and we had to have an
Uh-huh.
attorney walk us through the process. And yeah, it was a lot, but we donate. I mean, it's people have been so generous. We have more trouble finding schools that are we're able to work with than we do raising the funds, which is kind of amazing. So consider this an announcement. If there's a school that you know of that could use either one of our clinics or, just some musical pump up in general, let us know because we can make it happen anytime.
Yes, thank
Yeah,
you. I love that.
absolutely.
Um, I just felt like this upswelling, almost like water, groundwater coming up, lifting, a tide, rising tide lifts all ships. And we have
Oh,
so
yeah.
many kids that are in little corners here and there that are just ignored. Their schools aren't given the resources that they need, and they just don't see. I mean, not just in our country, but all over the world, they don't see possibility for their lives because the paradigm that they've been in is very small. So this project, among so many other beautiful projects, is really helping to, raise open up the amount of possibility that kids have in their lives. And I just want to thank you for bringing that to the world. And I want people to be able to connect with the work that you're doing. So how can people connect if they're so moved to do so?
Yeah. My personal website has links. So that's the launch pad for all the other sites. So dianaladio.com, DIANALADIO.com. And then right there is the blog, the nonprofit, the bands, everything. So yeah, absolutely.
All right, that's
Thanks so
so
much.
easy. So everybody can
Yes.
access that really quick. I'll make sure I link it with this conversation on my page as well. So it just makes it even easier.
Be
So
great.
I think now is a really good time to connect with a sort of rapid fire. Well, I guess it doesn't have to be, but let's sort of wrap things up here. And I for my own personal journey and the focus that I'm taking in my life is, how do we all live a life that feels more alive to us? And to me, that comes down to three basic components. The first being, how do we root ourselves in our lives? So, what are things for you that you notice really keep you rooted? And especially as you're traveling all over the world, doing what you do, how do you root yourself?
Yeah, I love this because you're right. It's had to be a very active process, with different hotel beds every night, different foods, different environments. I found that it is a combination of keeping, certain consistencies around, whether it's even just like a particular pillow that you love, or, different scents and lotions, just something that familiarizes yourself with what you're comfortable with and what's natural. But, it's all for me, it's in my emotional and mental work. It's if I'm going to take the time, like I said, in the morning to just kind of lay in bed and organize my day. And then there's a couple of just kind of practices and routines that I go through on pretty much a daily basis that they don't always feel necessary, like feels like we could just get up and start the day. And then as soon as I do them, I'm like, oh God, I definitely needed that. There were so many like wonderful brainstorms or just this general peace that came over me that allowed me to feel so much more equipped to start the day by actually prioritizing that time in the mornings. And it usually is in the mornings for me, that I found that starting the day in like a really hasty way is a recipe for a lot of stress later. you know
Disaster. Yeah,
yeah.
me too. I'm the same way. I need to start my day with a tall glass of water with some lemon in it. And if I do some movement and meditation in the morning, okay, I can tackle just about anything because now I'm rooted within myself. I'm connected to my inner state.
That's it. That connectedness and that slowness. And actually, I every couple of months I'll kind of rewrite some intentions and post them on my mirror. And that's been nice because I've been in my home for a
I
lot
love
more.
that.
I normally would take this with me and
I
stick
love
it on.
that.
Yeah, so there's another one that I wouldn't have thought of, but at the top for now for this month, because it was just kind of darting around, just crazy schedules. What we didn't really anticipate doing all the virtual stuff that we did last year is that now touring is picking up as well, so they're overlapping. So we're doing virtual stuff all day and then shows at night, and it's wonderful that we're working.
Whoa. Yeah.
But yeah, just completely unanticipated, how much would be happening all at once. And so at the top of my intentions list for the next month is slowness. Because if I can just slow my motions down, and that is something that I do in the morning in every hotel room very actively. Like, don't rush out of bed. Like, actually think about the steps you're taking. And when you're reaching for something, just slow the pace a little bit, and reaching in to turn on the shower a little more slowly. And you just, all of a sudden your muscles have to actually align in a way where you're in full control of everything.
Mm.
And strangely, that comes from the music school practice rooms when you're have a performance. And for us it was like, you did this in studio class where you had to perform for all your peers. Like, it's basically just the most judgmental scenario you could possibly imagine, where you get to play for all of the people you're competing against, and they get to basically critique you. And so I would go into the bathroom, and I would wash my hands, and I would, as slowly as possible, and I would kind of walk down the hallway and recite the words slow and controlled, because if
Mm.
not, the shakes kind of take over, and your kneecaps start going, and you're just the frantic nature of things, and you just kind of abandon so many things you've worked on in the practice room. So especially, as I mentioned, with kind of a quick pace brain, that level of slowness has to be so intentional. And on that note, one of the other things that I do every day is take a cold shower, which I know is
Yes.
crazy. Yeah. Ice cold.
Do you
Yeah.
take like I've been doing the Wim Hof like at the end of my
Yeah.
shower, turn it totally cold, and then just stay in it as long as I can stand, which is
Mhm.
about 30 seconds.
Yep.
Like what is that how you do yours too?
Yeah, and actually you'll appreciate this. I do my whole shower on hot, and then just the last like minute or so I'll just go, yep, ice cold. And I've found that it's like, if working against a quick paced brain and kind of frantic energy in normalcy is difficult, try doing it with like freezing cold water against you, because you want to go and shiver and like just kind of like go crazy. But if you can find control of your muscles and of your mental game to be able to just kind of stand there, and I'll usually go like this so I can at least like kind of clench. If you can find stillness in that environment, you're gonna probably be okay when somebody throws a problem at you, or somebody really irritates you, or you get cut off when you're driving. It's just everything kind of gets dialed back a little bit.
Totally
Um,
virtual high five, sister. That was
yeah, I
awesome. I
love
love
that. Yes.
it.
Oh, and so the second half of my ice cold shower, I do rapid fire gratitude. Um,
Woo!
yeah. I usually do it with people. So anything that comes to mind. Usually it'll start with like, thank you for this day, thank you for this cold water, thank you for the conversation I had last night, thank you for my friend Megan, thank you for my friend Stephanie, thank you that my mom is still with us, thank you that my dad, just anything you can think of, even if it's thank you that my feet are rooted on the ground right now, or that for me, having gone through knee surgery, thank you that I'm standing in the shower right now. It's just another one of those kind of mental shifts for the morning.
I love that gratitude is a part of your day. It's so important to me. That's a shift that I've started making in the last couple of years, of just intentionally every day feeling into gratitude and being grateful for my life as it is, instead of like constantly hoping it's something different.
Totally.
It's just, and when you're doing this rapid fire in the cold, what does that do for you? I've never thought of doing that. I'm really curious.
Well, on the one hand, it takes my mind off of the cold, and it just kind of allows me to mentally focus. But it's just that is like my instant perspective. Here I am. People battle the cold involuntarily, and the fact that I'm choosing to drench myself in freezing cold water is a level of privilege and luxury that I have to acknowledge, because it would, there's so much going so well in my life, and so much more than so many people, even just to get to play music for a living, and one extra 5 seconds in my day to make sure that I stay rooted in all of that, it changes everything. And when little things go wrong throughout the day, you have this bedrock of how good things are, and having been able to appreciate what isn't changing, and how trivial things are when so much of the foundation is solid and good.
I'm gonna try that tomorrow. I can't wait.
Yeah, it's
Very
fun.
exciting.
It's really fun.
So
Yeah,
let's move on to the second part of the three-prong approach. My three-prong approach to life.
I love it.
The resin. How do you resource yourself? What are some of the things that you feel feed your soul?
People. And I wouldn't have said that because I'm an introvert, 100%. I love my alone time, and I could close up for days, but I, if there's something that I know is going to just kind of bring me back out of my own head and into the world, and fill me with kind of warmth and love, it's the people that I have around me. And I have just an unbelievable support system between my friends in all corners of the world and my family and bands. That is often, with, like I said, with the rapid fire gratitude, that's what comes up constantly. And the list just goes and goes and goes of all the people I've been able to connect with. And yeah, I love connection. I love conversations like this. This is where I am fueled to keep going and to create, and all of that kind of comes
Yeah,
back to this
yeah,
intense contact. So
me
yeah.
too. I love it. I love it so much. So
Yeah.
when you're so busy as you are, how do you find the time, or how do you create that time to meaningfully connect with your support system, with your resource?
That's such an on point question, because that's, again, had to be very intentional. Yeah, because touring, especially when you have a great group of friends at home, being absent all the time, it's so easy to just slip off people's radars,
Yeah,
Eventually, unless you're really actively keeping the friendship alive, if you're not in front of them regularly, it's just really easy for things to just kind of slip away. And I had to learn that when I moved up to Traverse City, actually, and met this
hmm,
amazing crew of people, and learning, and they, granted, in total, like, compliments to the support systems in my life, they had to kind of find their own system for acknowledging that because I'm not in front of them doesn't mean that I'm not thinking about them and loving on them. And
right.
so I make a point, it's just always on my radar that those key people in my life will get a message every couple of days. And it's not like I put them on my list. It's that when they pop into my head, I text them. That's just it. Even if it's just a, hey, you popped into my head, how's this going? Or I'm thinking about you. Um, and if I have a couple of extra seconds, some people might pick up a book and read it. Some people might listen to music. Most of the time, if I have a free few minutes, I'm gonna pick one of the friends I haven't chatted with in a while, and check in with them, and
Mhm, mhm,
and maintain.
mhm,
But
mhm.
that also feeds me totally too. That would be the perfect, like, little refuel from for my use of that free time as well.
Yeah, that's something that I feel really resonating with myself as well. Like, I'm an introvert naturally. I can be perfectly happy for days, weeks, months on end not talking to anyone.
Hmm.
But at a certain point, it gets enough off center where I realize that I'm like really craving that connection. So, like in my life, I love how you said you just will, like, whenever somebody pops in, you'll send them a text message, a little note, and then when there is that time, when you create that time to more intentionally connect, then you do. I do kind of every once in a while go, okay, who are my soul sisters that I haven't talked to in a while? And I'll make like a little list. And then over the next couple of weeks, I make sure that I really connect in with them. Because if not, I mean, we're so far flung, right? Like, you've lived different places, you've made these different connections all over the world. It's important, if we want to maintain those friendships, to do so, right? So
Absolutely.
I
Well, and
love
we all have these kind of new skills after this year in COVID, where we couldn't see anybody. And
yeah.
and for me, having knee surgery and just kind of being on the couch, it was a cool opportunity for me to understand how much support you can feel even if you're not in front of them day to day,
Right,
you know?
right.
And I'm even learning about my friends, like, this particular friendship needs to be maintained a little bit more actively, because she's a little flighty, and wouldn't necessarily think to check in with me not for any reason other than she's so distracted in her day-to-day life, you know? But then I have other friends who I could not talk to for months. It doesn't ever really go that long, but I know that the second we talk, there's just this understanding that we don't necessarily need to check in every day. So
Like you're
everybody's
right back, on the couch with the coffee, and it's like you never left each other. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, you know.
So, what does it mean to you in your life to be? We're moving on to the third part.
Yes.
What does it feel like to you to feel that you're resonant in your life? What does that mean to you? I use the word resonant because as a musician, I think we're all resonating. And then when I see others that are resonating in their lives, I sense that like vibration from them.
Absolutely. Yeah, what came to mind for me is just staying as open and as receptive as possible. And maybe we're bringing it all the way back to the taking my hands off the wheel and not trying to control everything. Was I just, can feel the days where I'm in my shell and I'm closed up, even if I'm out traveling or if I mean, there are days where I can be closed in a show. And I would say I put a solid 6 or 7 years of touring in my life without learning how to be vulnerable on stage. And so there was just, you stomp around and you smile, and then you have some stock answers for people afterwards at the merch table, and then you go on to the next. And my life completely changed after my move to Traverse City, and getting to know some people up there that were experts in vulnerability and just knew how to speak openly and deeply. And I knew it was there, but it had been suppressed for so long that it was like this opening that happened, and instantly my demeanor on stage changed. I was having such meaningful connections with people at the tables afterwards, and I was closing my eyes and had a more just thoughtful expression on my face in pictures instead of like the total turn on the shining light charisma. And I found that my performances were so much more meaningful, my connections were deeper, and I can feel the days when I still put the hood and sunglasses on and just shut everybody out. And there's a joke in my band that even when I do that, there will still, by the end of the flight, the person next to me will have told me their life story. And I think it's just the best thing. And I'm sure you find this too, that when you just, even when I'm not trying to, if you live with that openness and that ability to receive, and you carry yourself in a way that says, I'm here, I'm available to you, I'm one that's trying to keep the positivity in the world going, and people sense that and they know that, and it just leads to such meaningful connections. So
Yeah.
resonance for me is vulnerability and openness.
I love that.
Oh,
Thank you
I
so
love
much
the
for this.
conversation.
Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.
Oh,
Just the thought of like being open so that you're like more porous with those around you and connective.
porous. I love that.
This has
Yeah.
been like such an amazing conversation. Before we wrap up, I just want to make sure and ask you what else is coming up for you? What else feels important to share right now?
Mm. Yeah, I would say, because you brought up that most recent blog post, I feel really strongly that right now is such a cool opportunity for everybody to think about what gets added back in, you know? And for me, aside from the couple of things I mentioned, I think taking a little bit more time for myself and not feeling guilty for taking time for myself. And for me, that looks like traveling and visiting friends and maintaining those friendships, and so many things that would have taken a back seat because clearly, the gigs are the top priority at all time. How are you going to work? How are you going to make money? How are you going to advance your career? How are you going to make yourself physically the best you can be? And all of that needs to take a backseat to relationships. That's it. And it wasn't until a couple years ago that I started to understand that, and last year really taught me how full life can feel in the absence of so many things, but by maintaining those connections and the quiet time and the stillness. And it has to continue for me. I will not let it go. So yeah, I would
That to me,
encourage everybody to think of that.
that to me feels like the most important takeaway and the perfect icing on the cake. Thank you so much, Diana.
Oh, thank you, Anne Marie. I always treasure our conversations, so it's a treat to have
Same,
it to revisit afterwards, have it recorded.
same, same.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I hope this conversation was as nurturing for you as it was for me. And I wish you all well. So, all right. Bye-bye, everybody.